Hello, and welcome to the Introduction to Building Checklist video. My name is Anne England, and in this video I'm going to talk you through the process of building and maintaining checklists, scheduling work, and assigning work to a team. The approach I'll be taking will be to create a fairly straightforward checklist first, and then I'm going to gradually build on it by introducing different elements that will make it more efficient to use. Before you start, all you need to have is access to the control center with safety manager rights and a checklist. So let's log in. From your browser, log in to the control center. You then need to go to Configuration, Work Management, and then View Edit. You will now see 5 tabs along the top: Where, Who, What, When, and Work. We'll be concentrating on the What, When, and Work tabs today, but I'll briefly explain the Where and Who tabs now. The Where tab stores your locations. It's where you, your devices, and sensors live. You can also see who the administrators and safety managers are of that location. The Who tab stores your teams and users. The Teams tab is where you add and remove teams of people. You can add and unassign users from here too. The Users tab is where you add, change, block, and delete user profiles. You can also add or remove them from their relevant teams and locations, and assign user-defined roles. Next, the What tab. This is where we create checklists. Now bear in mind that the function of this tab is to house the checklists, not to assign them. That comes later. What is also important to note is that one checklist can be assigned to multiple teams, so any changes you make to a checklist affects all of the teams the checklist has been assigned to. So we're now going to create a new checklist. The first thing I need is the checklist that I want to build, and here is a cut down version in Excel, but you may well have yours in Word or PDF. From here, I can see that this is a daily opening checks checklist. It's completed on Monday to Friday between 6 and 8 a.m. There is an optional comments box at the bottom, and it also needs to be signed off by the on-duty manager. So now we need to build this in the control center, but before I do that, I'm just going to copy the title Daily Opening Checks. Now I'm going back into the control center. We're already in the What tab, so to create a new checklist, click the green Add New button on the left. I'm now going to paste the title of the checklist into the name field. The format is going to be checklist because we have a number of things to do, and then press Save at the bottom of the screen to save the heading. Now we need to add the individual checks, and the mindset I'm going in with is I just need to know that it's been done. So you could say that the setup of this first checklist is the most straightforward option, but is it the best? I'm now going to press Add at the bottom, and the majority of these checks will have a check type of Confirm Instruction. The first check was Safety Precautions, so I could type that in, or I could just copy from the spreadsheet and paste. I'll select the cell, copy the first part from the spreadsheet, and then paste it into the checklist as the name. We're going to have this as a single check because it's the only thing I need to do, and then I'm going to select Confirm Instruction from the drop-down. This means that when the person completes the check, all they need to do is read the instructions if there are any, and then press Confirm. I'm now going to copy the rest of the text in this cell and then paste it into the additional check details box on the check. The person completing the check will see this text when they open it. And that's all I need for this check, so I'm going to press Save at the bottom. If I now press back, I can see that the first check has been created. Now for the rest of the checks, and I want most of them to be in the same format as this first check. But rather than going through the process of adding each one individually, What I'm going to do is duplicate this first one to create the next one, and so on. I can duplicate a check by opening the check, press duplicate at the bottom to create a copy, back to my spreadsheet, copy the next check, and then paste it over the name. I'll take out the additional check details because they don't apply to this check, and then press save. And then I repeat the process. I'm already in the check, so I press duplicate. This creates a copy. I'll copy the next check from the spreadsheet and then paste it over the name. Save, duplicate to create a copy, copy the next check and paste. Save, duplicate to create a copy the text from the spreadsheet and then paste. And then the last one, save, duplicate, copy, paste, and then save. Okay, so now if I go back, we can now see that all of the checks have been added to the checklist. The next thing I want to do is add my comments box, but I don't want to duplicate an existing check because I need this check to be free text. So I'm going to add, I'm happy with comments as the name of the check. It's going to be a single check. I want it to be free text or numeric input. And the validation type will be text validation. This means that the person completing the check will have to type something using the keypad on the device. In the additional check details box, I'm going to say, please provide details of the issue. Now we need to ask ourselves whether or not we want to raise an alert. If you tick the box, then two things will happen if the check is completed. The first thing is that the supervisor of the team will receive a check alert notification by email, and the second thing is that a check alert will be generated in the control center and it will then need to be cleared. I want to know if someone has added comments, so I'm going to tick the box and then press save. If I now press back, we can now see that the check has been added at the bottom of the checklist. The last thing I need to do on this check is to make it optional. You may remember that this was optional on the spreadsheet, so I'm reflecting that here. Press save. Finally, I need to add the on-duty manager sign-off check. So I'm going to add. The title will be on-duty manager sign-off. It's going to be a single check, confirm instruction, and maybe a bit of additional text to say something like duty manager only to sign off the completed checklist. And then save. Okay, so that's it. Now for a bit of tidying up. So I'm going to go back and show you how to move, remove, and disable checks. I've added these checks in the same order as the spreadsheet, but I may want to move them around. And I can do this by hovering over the cross to the left of the check I want to move until I see a cross-style cursor. Then hold the mouse button down whilst you move the check to where you want it to be, and then release. Press save or cancel if you change your mind. Now I want to remove a check, and I can do this by either deleting or disabling the check. If I wanted to delete a check completely, I can do so by pressing the bin to the right of the check. It will then disappear immediately, but the change won't be committed until I press save. So if you delete it by accident, just press cancel at the bottom and then discard changes. Otherwise, press save. An alternative to deleting a check is to disable it. If you disable a check, then it will be suppressed from the checklist on the device, but it will still be visible here in the control center. It's a good option to use if you're unsure as to whether you want to keep it. So that's our first checklist completed. What we now need to think about is when we want it to be scheduled for. If we want the work to be completed on specific days, at specific times, or both, then we need to create a schedule, and we do that from the When tab. The information in this tab contains a list of all schedules that can be applied to a piece of work. So just like the checklist that can be assigned to multiple locations, a schedule can be applied to multiple lines of work. So we need to be mindful of that when we name them. And here are some examples. We have daily, so that's every day. Weekly, on specific days of the week. Several times during the day. Repeating, every 2 hours between specific hours. And this one, which is on a fixed day each quarter of the year. I'm going to create a new one, so press Add New at the top. And I know my checklist needs to be completed on Monday to Friday between 6 and 8, so it makes sense for me to use that in the name. I'm going to type Monday to Friday, and then in brackets 0600 to 0800. The date frequency options are daily, which means every day of the week, weekly, monthly, or yearly. In this example, I need to be able to say Monday to Friday, so to do that, I use the weekly option. You will then see the individual days of the week, and all I need to do is untick the days that don't apply. So in my case, untick Saturday and Sunday, because the work is going to be scheduled on Monday to Friday. Now the time frequency. I only want it to run once during those days, so I'll leave the default of once, and I'll be looking at the other two options later. The next field is the time that the work needs to be started, so that's the time it appears on the device. Mine will be 0600 and it's in 24-hour format. The time to complete is how long we want to give the team to complete the checklist. So you'll remember that the spreadsheet said 6 till 8, which is 2 hours. But you'd also have the option of minutes and days. Completion within this time frame means that the checklist is on time. This next field, the overdue checklists are cancelled after field, is what I like to think of as extra time. And again, you have the option of minutes, hours, or days. I'll be using minutes. If I change that to say 30 minutes, what I'm actually saying is that they will have a total of 2.5 hours to complete the work. However, the difference between these two fields is important. Completion within the time to complete window is what you're aiming for because it will be on time. Anything after that means that the work becomes overdue, and then 3 things will happen. The first thing is that an overdue alert notification will automatically be sent by email to the supervisor of the team. An overdue alert will be generated in the control center, and this will then need to be cleared. The checklist itself will move to the overdue section on the device. The work will then stay in the overdue section for the length of time that you set in the overdue field. If the work is completed in this window, the work will be marked as completed late. Once the time has expired, and if the checklist has not been completed, it will then be removed from the device and the work will be marked as incomplete or missed. So I'm going to change my mind and give them 1.5 hours to complete it, and then 30 minutes as overdue, which is a total of 2 hours. And then save. Now that we have everything in place, we can create a line of work. We have the where for the location, the who for our team, the what for our checklist, and the when for the schedule. Each element in these tabs work independently until we get to the Work tab, which is when we bring it all together. From the Work tab, we're now going to assign the checklist to our team, and to do this, I click the green Create New button. I enter the location, mine is Fleet Manor, I enter the name of the team that I want to do the work. I enter the name of the checklist that I want them to complete. And finally, the schedule. And then create new on the right-hand side. At 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, the work will be there ready for my team to complete. Now let's fast forward to tomorrow morning to complete the work. I'm now logged into the device, and we can see that the checklist is here in the due section, and it's there because we applied a schedule to the line of work. Now I tap the checklist to see the checks, and in that list we have a number of mandatory checks to complete. And we know they're mandatory because they're represented by a blue circle. We can also see that there's an optional check, and we know it's optional because it's represented by the question mark. And let's hope the team remember that the last check has to be completed by their manager and not by them. If I complete the first check, I can see that there is some text, so that's the additional check details I entered earlier. I then press confirm to complete the check and proceed with the rest. If I need to add any comments, then I can complete the optional comments check at the bottom and then add some text. This was our free text check that I entered earlier. And then I have to remember not to complete that last check because that's for our manager to complete. So in the ideal world, the operator will either log out or be timed out, and the manager will log in, which I'll do now. The manager can now see and pick up the checklist from the incomplete section. They can then see all of the checks that have been completed, by who and when. At the bottom is the check that they need to complete. So they select the check and then say confirm. I don't need to complete the comments box, so I just need to press I'm done. And now the completed checklist has dropped off the list of things to do. So now we've seen the checklist in action, we know our team is completing it, but how did they find using it? Let's have a read of some of their feedback. Why do I have to read the safety precautions every time? Can I add more than one comment? Can we take photos? Can we change the pest activity check to a yes or no answer? And I keep completing the on-duty manager sign-off by accident. So on reflection, I can see why the users might be a bit frustrated. And whilst the checklist may have been fairly straightforward for me to set up, it may not actually have been the best experience for the user. So now what we're going to do is take our original checklist, make some small changes, and by taking it up a level, we'll make the process a bit easier and more efficient, which will hopefully make our staff a bit happier too. So let's go back to our checklist. Okay, so first question, why do I have to read the safety precautions every time? Good point. I know my staff know what the safety precautions are, but I'd still like the check to be there if they want to read it. And it would be good to have for new staff too. So I'm going to make that check optional, but I'm also going to make it repeatable, which means that they can read it multiple times if they want to. The next question was, can I add more than one comment? Absolutely, and I can do that by making my comments check repeatable as well as optional, which means they can add as many comments as they need. Whilst I'm in this check, I can address the next question, which was, can we take photos? Yes, you can. If you have this feature switched on, then you'll see a blue paperclip button on your checks, which means that you can optionally take a photo. I'll make sure that I tell people about it, but I could also remind them by adding a note to the checks where I think a photo would help. I could add some more details into the additional check details box, or in the case of free text type checks, I could add it into the input prompt field. This means that any text I add in here will appear below the text line on the check. So I'll add take a photo if it helps, and then blue paperclip in brackets. The next question was, can we change the pest activity check to a yes or no answer? This is a great question because currently the check asks them to confirm. So does confirm mean that there are or aren't pests? So we're going to make that check less confusing by presenting them with a question that needs either a yes or no answer. And we're going to do this using the list of options check type. I now have the pest activity check open, and the first thing I'm going to do is change the name of the check to Are there signs of pest activity? I'm then going to change the check type from Confirm Instruction to List of Options. This means that the user will be presented with a list and they have to choose one option from that list. So now we need to specify what those options are. I like to add the positive first, so I'll say checked OK, there are no signs of pest activity. And then the negative, so add, and then I'll say problem found, there are signs of pest activity. At this point, I could tick this alert if selected box. What this means is that if someone completes that check, then the supervisor will get a check alert email and a check alert will be generated on the control center. However, when they get that email or see the alert in the control center, they'll see problem found, there are signs of pest activity. If I was the supervisor, I'd probably need a bit more information, so I'd either have to go and speak to the person who completed this check or go and investigate it myself. The good news is I can avoid both of those scenarios by using a follow-up check. Using a follow-up means that I either need someone to do something else or I need them to tell me something else. In this case, it's the latter. I need them to tell me where the problem is. So to add a follow-up, I need to add a follow-up check. If the Add button is not visible, press Save first, and then press Add alongside the follow-up check. Now we need to specify what the follow-up is. What do we need them to do, or what do we need to ask them? So first the name, and I'm going to call this Report the Problem. I'm going to make that a single check, and I'm going to make it free text with text validation because I need the person who is completing the check to type in the details of the problem. And then in the additional check details box, I'll say, please provide details and the location. I'm also going to remind them that they can take a photo. So I'll add take a photo if it helps, and then blue paperclip in brackets in the input prompt field. It's now at this point that I want to raise an alert, because the person completing the check will have had to enter some text, which in turn means that the person receiving and dealing with the alert will have more information, and then save. Now if I go back, you can see that the follow-up check button has now turned green to indicate that there is a follow-up check, and that check will only be visible to the user if the problem found option is selected. So this list of options is great for instances where you want, say, a yes or no answer, or a yes, no, or not applicable answer, or if you have a fixed list of something, for example, suppliers. Anything that saves people typing is a bonus. Now for the last question. I keep completing the on-duty manager sign-off check by accident. This is a really neat fix because we're going to use a feature called user-defined roles, and this feature allows you to specify that a check or an entire checklist is role-based. This last check is a perfect example because we want someone who is an on-duty manager to complete the check. So what I want to do is this. I want to create my own role called on-duty manager. I then want to assign that role to a check, or it could be to an entire checklist, and then assign the role to a person or to people. To do that, I click on the Advanced button at the top right here, and this button is only available in the Work Management configuration window. So if you're on the dashboard, from Configuration, you go to Work Management, View Edit, and then Advanced at the top right. At the bottom, we have User Roles. I already have mine set up, But if you wanted to add a new one, you would press Add at the bottom right, type in the name of the role, and then Save. We now need to add our new role to the check, or it could be to a checklist, and to the person or people who is going to fulfill that role. I'm going to go back to my dashboard from the top here or from the Home button on the right, back into Configuration, Work Management, View Edit, and then back into the What tab. I'm going to open my Daily Opening Checks checklist and then open the On Duty Manager Sign Off check. At the bottom, you'll see a section called Custom Roles. In the Roles field, I want to select a role, so I'm going to type in On Duty Manager, select it from the list, and then press Save. Finally, I need to assign this role to a person or to people, and I do that from the Who tab. Click on the Users tab and select the person that you want to assign the role to. And then at the bottom, you will see Custom Roles. This person already has 2, but I need to assign another one, so I'm going to select the role, type in On Duty Manager, select it from the list, and then Save. The beauty with this feature is that if this person left or changed roles, all I would need to do is unassign the role from here and then assign it to someone else. I wouldn't need to worry about the checks because they're assigned to a role and not to an individual. So that's it. That's all of our questions answered. We've really tidied our checklist up now, so hopefully these small changes will make a big difference to the team. So let's run it again to see what those changes look like. Now what I could do is wait until the checklist comes up tomorrow, but I want to have a quick look now. So I'm going to do that by running the checklist as an unscheduled piece of work. And I do that by pressing the square button at the bottom left of the screen. I'll then see a list of checklists, so I select my checklist from the list, and there I can immediately see some of my changes. The safety precautions is now optional, it now has a question mark, but it's also repeatable, and we know it's repeatable because we can see the blue circular arrow. If I complete it and press confirm, I can now see that it's been completed once. If I then run it again because it's repeatable, and then confirm, I can see that the count has increased to 2. So this is the number of times the check has been viewed. Then we have the signs of pest activity. Here are my 2 options and I can only complete one. You'll remember that I added a follow-up to the problem found option. So if I choose that option, I'll see the follow-up. Here are the additional details that I entered, and we can also see the input prompt beneath the text line, reminding me that I can take a photo. So let's complete that check. Let's say we found some ants in the staff kitchen, so I type in that text, and then I need to take a photo. So I press the blue paperclip, select Add Photo, ask them to smile, then press the camera button, and then press the green tick at the bottom left of the screen. This photo is now attached to the check and will be visible in the work report, but it will also be visible on the check alert and alerts report because we flagged this check to raise an alert. Next, we can see the comments box. We can see that that is also now repeatable, so they can enter as many comments as they like. And finally, the On Duty Manager sign-off. You may remember that I assigned the role of On Duty Manager to Annie and not to Eve, who we're logged in as right now. This means that she doesn't have the rights to complete the check, which is why the check is greyed out. If she tries to complete the check, it will say that she can't because it's a role-controlled check, but it will also tell her who does have that role. So I'll now log in as Annie. From the login screen, we can see her list of roles beneath her name. When I log in, she'll be able to pick up the checklist, and then at the bottom, that check will be available to her because she has the authority to complete it. So I can now complete that and then say confirm. And that is our first checklist done. Now that I'm happy with that format, what I can now do is use this checklist like a template for other checklists. In other words, I can duplicate it. Let's say that I wanted to create my daily closing checks checklist as well. But rather than starting from scratch, what I can do is use an existing checklist as the template and then duplicate it. This will duplicate the entire checklist, including follow-ups and alerts. To do that, I open the checklist that I want to duplicate, press duplicate at the bottom to create a copy, and then all I need to do is make any changes that I need and then save. I hope you'll agree that that's much easier than creating a new one from scratch. Now we're going to move on to our last example, temperature checks. In this last example, I'm going to show you how to create a checklist that includes temperatures with follow-up checks, and you may want to do this for food or water temperatures. I'm going to use cooking temperatures, and the concept is that we want to take the temperature of something. We expect it to be within a certain temperature range, and if it's not in that range, then we need to do something else. So we're actually going to use 2 follow-ups, and then we'll throw in an alert for good measure. Here's my spreadsheet with a list of food items. It's called Cooking Temperatures. I can see that it needs to be run Monday to Friday, and the temperatures need to be taken 3 times a day at 11, 1 and 3. I have a list of products that I need to take the temperatures of, and some notes at the bottom about what to do if the temperature is under. So back into the control center, and I'm still in the What tab. I'm going to add new to add my next checklist. I'm going to call it Cooking Temps. It's going to be a checklist, and save. Now we need to add our food items, so press add at the bottom, and my first item was beef. It's going to be a single check, and this time I'm going to say measure temperature. In the additional details box, I'm going to copy the text from the spreadsheet and then paste. Then we have manual temperature check. If I tick the manual temperature box, then the person completing the check would need to type in the temperature. I'm not going to tick the box because I want them to use the Checkit probe. I want them to use the red probe, so I'm going to specify red as the probe colour. What this will do is stop them from using the wrong coloured probe. So if they try to use a blue probe, then they won't be able to. If you specify any colour, then they can either use red or blue. I want to be specific, so I'll stick with red. The acceptable range fields are the minimum and maximum temperatures that the product can be. From the spreadsheet, I know that the minimum is 75, and I'll enter 120 as the maximum. If the temperature is out of range, do we want an alert? No, not at this stage. But I do want to follow up. So if it's out of range, I need you to do something. If we look back at the spreadsheet, we can see that if the temperature is too low, they need to continue cooking until it reaches the core temperature, and then they need to take the temperature again. Press save. That will then enable the follow-up check add button. So I'm going to press add, and I'm going to call the check out of range temperature corrective actions. It'll be a single check, and I'd like a list of options. The first option is going to be cook further and retake the temperature, and then add the next one, which is going to be destroy food and note the wastage. If I want them to note down the wastage, why don't I give them another follow-up so they can do that? So I want to press save and then add alongside the follow-up check to this one, and I'm going to call this follow-up number wasted. It'll be a single check, free text, And this time it's going to be numeric validation, which means that the number pad will display on the device. It's now at this point that I want to raise an alert, because at this point I will have all the information that I need, and then press save. So the last thing I need to do with this check is to make it repeatable. And I need to make it repeatable because if I go back, I've instructed them to take the temperature again if the temperature is low. So I'm going to go back to the beginning, and I can do that by pressing the back button multiple times. Or I can go back to any of the steps by clicking on the step at the top here. I want to go back to the beginning, so I'll click on the first step, which is effectively the heading. So there's beef. I want to make it repeatable, and I'm just going to double check what I've done. I select the product. I measure the temperature with a red probe. The temperature should be between 75 and 120. If it's not, I'll then get a follow-up, which will then ask me to either cook further and retake the temperature or destroy food and note the wastage. If I select the second option, I will then have to enter the number wasted, and then that will send an alert. Finally, I also want to make it optional, and I'm going to explain why I want to do that shortly. Now I'm happy with that format. I can create the rest by duplicating this first one to create the rest. So I'm just going to save that one, open the first check, duplicate to create a copy, and then replace the name with the next product. That was lamb. Save, and then repeat for the others. So duplicate, overtype the name with chicken, save, duplicate, and then pork, save, duplicate, and so on until all of the products have been added. I'm now going to move to a checklist I prepared earlier, and here you can see all of the products listed. We can also see that there are two other checks at the bottom, one that caters for other products and the other that caters for the scenario where there is nothing to probe at the time of the check. Both of these are optional. If I look at the other products check, you'll see that this is a checklist. So I now have a checklist in a checklist. My first check is free text, where I ask them to type the name of the product. And my second check is a repeatable temperature check. The rules, if you like, are the same as my other checks. So I use the red probe, my temperature range is the same, and if it's out of range, I have my follow-ups. So the behaviour of this check is the same as the listed products. The only difference is that I have to type in the name of the product. And then there is another check at the bottom called nothing to probe at time of check. And I have that check because the checklist is scheduled at specific times. So I need to account for the fact that there may be nothing to probe. Now, if I left the checklist like this, so all of the checks are optional, what could happen is that they open the checklist and do nothing because all of the checks are optional. So what if I unticked everything to make all of the checks mandatory? Well, I don't really want to do that either because not all of the products are cooked throughout the day. So I'm going to strike a balance. I'm going to say that all of the checks are optional, but I want them to complete at least one. So in the minimum optional checks box, I'm going to specify 1. So at least 1 out of 14 has to be completed. What this means is that a minimum of 3 products would be checked because my checklist is going to be scheduled 3 times a day. Now for the schedule. We're in the When tab and we know that we want this scheduled 3 times a day at 11, 1 and 3 on Monday to Friday. And there are 2 ways that we can do this. I'm going to press Add New. I'm going to call this Cooking Temps and I'm going to add the time in brackets just to make it easier when I create the line of work. So 11, 1300 and 1500. I want this Monday to Friday, so I'm going to change the date frequency from daily to weekly and untick Saturday and Sunday. With the time frequency, you have 2 options. If I select several times, I then need to specify the times I want the checklist to be scheduled for. So I type 11, add time, add 13, add time, and then add 15. Another way of doing this is to use the repeating option. I know that I want this checklist to appear every 2 hours, so I could say every 2 hours I want it to start at 11 and I want the last one to be generated at 1500. So that will generate every 2 hours starting at 11 with the last one generated at 3. The checklist will still come up 3 times, it's just a different way of doing it. So the last bit is the line of work. I'll save that and then go to the Work tab. We press Create New, select our location, the team that we want to complete the work, the name of the checklist we want them to complete, and the schedule. And then press Create New on the right-hand side to create the line of work. Let's now see how that looks. Okay, so here's my temperature checks checklist. And here at the top, I can see that I have one optional check before the checklist is considered as complete. I'm going to complete the first one and it should turn green because I fixed the first one so that the temperature will be in range. Press the product, take my probe, press the button. It will then vibrate in my hand, take the temperature, and it reads green because it's within range. So I can just press record to that and accept. Now what I could do, because I've honoured the rules of this checklist, I could press I'm done because I've completed that one check. However, I want you to see the follow-up, so I'm going to do a couple of others. I do the lamb, I take my probe, press the button, then take the temperature, and this time it will fail. So we can see our temperature range is there. I still record and accept, but because it's outside of that range, I then get my follow-up. If I choose the second option of destroy the product and note down the wastage, when I confirm, it will then ask me to enter the number. So this was my second follow-up. I'll then see the number pad, enter the number, and then confirm. So that's it. Our temperature checklist has now been completed. And finally, before I go, I'd just like to add a couple of tips. The first one is that anything you run on the device will appear on the work report, so that's worth bearing in mind if you're testing. And the second tip is that if you have work that's unscheduled, such as deliveries, then all you need to do is select Not Scheduled in the Schedule field on the line of work. So that now brings me to the end of the Introduction to Building Checklist video. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found it useful.